Look at her, Venice, in the year of our Lord 1576, a magnificent floating empire built on water, unimaginable wealth and absolute blinding arrogance. They truly believed they were the center of the world, a divine republic untouchable by the miseries of the mainland. The Venetian fleet ruled the Mediterranean, bringing back treasures that would make emperors weep. From the glowing glass furnaces of Murano to the bustling, deafening shipyards of the arsenal, the city hummed with the relentless energy of supreme power. But beneath the shimmering golden reflections of the grand palazzos, down in the dark, stagnant, foul-smelling canals, something ancient and merciless was already waiting in the shadows. They drank their heavy red wines from fine, fragile crystal goblets imported from distant lands. They draped their bodies in the most expensive, heavy silks from the East, embroidered with threads of pure gold and silver. The nobility walked the polished marble floors of St. Mark's Square, believing their money, their naval supremacy, and their grand architecture could buy them immunity from death itself. But wealth is a heavy, useless anchor when the tide of history turns, and the abyss does not care about your gold, your noble titles, or your desperate whispered prayers. The fog rolled in from the east, and with it a heavy, suffocating silence that felt like a physical threat pressing against the chest. A shadow appeared on the stone bridge, not a man, but an omen, the harbinger of the end, wrapped in dark cloth, stepping silently over the cobblestones. It started small, as all great and terrible tragedies do, a scratch in the dark, a stowaway hidden deep in the damp wooden belly of the merchant ships returning from the Levant. The markets thrived. The laughter echoed across the bustling, sun-lit piazzas. They traded exotic spices, vibrant dyes, and precious metals, completely unaware they were trading their very lives for a handful of silver coins. Behind the beautiful, intricate velvet masks of the carnival, they hid their deepest fears, playing endless games of love, betrayal, and politics. But you cannot hide from a terror that is already breathing inside your walls. The golden age of the Republic was bleeding out, drop by drop, into the murky, unforgiving waters of the lagoon.
The mighty arsenal of Venice built warships to conquer the known world. Thousands of men worked day and night, their hammers ringing out in a symphony of industry, constructing the galleys that protected their trade routes. But no wooden wall, no matter how thick, no matter how well crafted by the master shipbuilders, could keep this invisible enemy out. Deep in the damp, labyrinthine cellars of the city, among the fragrant barrels of cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves, the true conqueror of Venice multiplied in the pitch black. The wealthy merchants obsessively counted their silver coins behind locked doors, blind to the terrifying fact that their currency was about to lose all earthly meaning. You cannot bribe a disease. You cannot negotiate a treaty with a plague. Vibrant red and blue fabrics hung in the summer sun, drying in the salty breeze, casting beautiful, colorful shadows on the ancient stone. A beautiful, vibrant facade for a city that was rapidly rotting from the inside out. Then came the first locked doors. The heavy, rusted iron of the quarantine decree. The word itself, quarantine, 40 days, was invented here, born from sheer terror. It was the terrifying final sound of a tomb sealing its inhabitants alive. Entire families were locked inside their own homes at the first sign of a cough, their doors marked with a cross. The bustling piazzas emptied overnight. The pigeons starved on the cobblestones, finding no bread from the vanished crowds. The vibrant, beating heart of the Venetian Republic simply stopped. In the dim, dusty light of the grand archives, desperate priests and scholars frantically searched ancient texts for salvation. They looked to the Greeks, to the Romans, to the alignment of the stars. They found no cures, only apocalyptic warnings of divine wrath. Luxury quickly turned to rot. The expensive silver platters, once piled high with exotic meats and fruits, now held nothing but decay and swarming flies. The massive feast was officially over. A massive dark storm gathered over the majestic domes of St. Mark's Basilica. The heavens themselves seemed to turn their back on the doomed city, plunging the Golden Republic into a premature, terrifying twilight.
Panic set in like a second, deadlier disease. It stripped away centuries of civilization, culture, and manners in a matter of days. They frantically boarded their beautiful stained glass windows with rough, splintered wood, trying to nail shut the doors to hell. They burned heavy frankincense, myrrh, and sulfur in the streets, hoping to purify the poisoned air. But the sweet, thick smoke only masked the overwhelming metallic scent of death that hung heavy over the canals. The marble fountains dried up. The ancient stone cracked under the scorching, unforgiving summer sun. Nature was violently reclaiming the stones of the Republic. The invisible assassin had finally revealed itself. A single, microscopic flea carried on the back of a black rat. A tiny, insignificant bite that would bring a global empire to its knees in a matter of weeks. It struck the loyal servants first. The sudden, violent collapse in the kitchen, the agonizing black boil erupting on the neck or the groin, the horrifying realization of the end. Lavish dinners were abandoned mid-bite. Heavy wooden chairs were overturned in a frantic, hopeless rush to escape the inevitable fate. The fever burned through their veins like liquid fire, boiling the mind and breaking the body. The sweat of the high nobility suddenly smelled exactly like the sweat of the poorest beggar. Death was the ultimate, undeniable equalizer. The narrow canals choked with empty, drifting gondolas, a chaotic traffic jam of ghost ships in a rapidly dying metropolis, bumping aimlessly against the mossy brick walls. Up on the flat terracotta rooftops they danced, a hysterical, desperate, wine-soaked celebration at the very edge of the abyss. If they were to die, they would die as Venetians, with music, wine, and defiance. But the music soon turned to dissonance. Hands trembled violently on the strings of the violins. The legendary art and culture of Venice was paralyzed by sheer, unadulterated terror. Desperate noblewomen stood on the bridges, throwing their heavy pearls and gold necklaces into the dark canal water, a useless, pathetic bribe to a god that was no longer listening. The golden cage remained perfectly intact, but the exotic, beautiful girds inside were dead. The plague climbed the grand, sweeping marble staircases of the palazzos. It did not knock. It did not ask for permission from the armed guards. It simply took everything it touched. Parents abandoned their children. Husbands abandoned their wives. The primal instinct to survive erased all human bonds. Innocent children hid in the deep shadows beneath heavy oak tables, clutching wooden toys, watching their entire world dissolve into a waking nightmare. Advanced Renaissance medicine was reduced to the frantic, primitive grinding of roots, dried blood, and herbs. Doctors prescribed crushed emeralds and violent bloodletting, desperate alchemy against an invincible, invisible demon. The ornate, gilded mirrors cracked, reflecting a reality too horrific to bear. The grand illusion of Venetian immortality shattered into 1,000 sharp, useless pieces. The great bronze bell of St. Mark's Campanile tolled endlessly, not to mark the passing of the hours, but to count the dead, a relentless, deafening rhythm that echoed across the lagoon. the fading heartbeat of a dying city. They shook the rusted iron gates of their quarantine with bloody, blistered hands, trapped like wild animals in the very city they once ruled with an iron fist. They threw their own expensive velvet clothes into roaring fireplaces, hoping the violent fire would cleanse the deep-rooted infection from the fabric. And then, the shadow of the plague doctor grew larger on the peeling walls, a monstrous, distorted silhouette that became the terrifying new king of Venice. They wore long coats coated in wax to repel the infected blood. Behind the terrifying stitched leather beak, they breathed through dried lavender, mint, camphor, and cloves, trying desperately to filter out the stench of hell. They touched patients only with long wooden canes, but beneath the monstrous mask was just a fragile, mortal man, sweating profusely, completely exhausted, and just as afraid of the invisible killer as the rest of them. Even absolute generational genius could not survive this purge. The great painter Titian lay dead in his dusty studio, his final, breathtaking masterpiece left forever unfinished on the easel. Shiny gold ducats lay scattered in the filthy street mud, completely untouched by the starving beggars, because you cannot buy a single breath of
Thousands
clean
of
air.
tiny, flickering wax candles filled the pitch-dark square, a sea of fragile, trembling hope in an endless ocean of despair. A heavy, rough-hewn wooden cross was raised high against the smoke-filled sky. The Doge stepped forward into the falling ash and made a solemn, historic vow to the heavens. If the city survived this nightmare, they would build a magnificent temple, a church dedicated to the Redeemer, a permanent monument of gratitude. And then, the freezing, violent winter wind finally arrived. It whipped through the narrow canals, howling through the empty palazzos, carrying away the stagnant, poisoned air. Pure, brilliant white snow fell heavily over the filth, the mud, and the decay, a pristine, purifying blanket covering the deep, bleeding scars of the city. The nightmare was frozen solid in the winter ice, a tragic, haunting beauty preserved in the cold, harsh light of a new reality. The sharp quill scratched loudly across the thick leather ledger, tossing out the dead, closing the darkest, most terrifying chapter in Venetian history. A breathtaking, pale pink dawn broke over the still, mirror-like water of the lagoon. The city of reflections mirrored a new beginning, the calm after the storm. The Doge kept his solemn promise. Industrious masons returned to work, their hammers ringing out once more across the water. The magnificent white marble dome of Il Redentore pierced the vibrant blue sky, a triumph of faith, a lasting monument to those who were lost, and a beacon for those who remained. Every year they would build a bridge of boats across the canal to celebrate their survival. Centuries pass like morning fog, rolling over the water. The 16th century wooden gondola morphs seamlessly into the modern age. Motorboats replace oars, but the ancient stones remember everything. Today, millions of tourists walk these exact same steps. They take photos, they laugh, they drink wine in the piazzas, completely oblivious to the 50,000 ghosts resting silently beneath their feet. But if you look closely into the dark, rippling water of the canals, if you listen to the wind howling through the narrow alleyways when the city sleeps, the reflection of the plague doctor still shimmers in the twilight. Venice dances on, a beautiful, resilient woman in an intricate golden mask, smiling bravely through the tears of her past, the eternal, tragic, and undeniable beauty of the floating city.